Coming to you live from the hills of East Tennessee. Welcome back, everyone. It's another episode of The Lore of the Ring. I thank you all for joining me once again. My name's Dustin, and of course here on The Lore of the Ring, we discuss professional wrestling's history, promotion by promotion. Last episode was our first episode, WrestleMania 22. Got a lot of positive feedback. That means a lot to me. I appreciate everyone who tuned in and who gave feedback and seemed to have enjoyed themselves listening to me ramble about a pretty iconic show. Tonight, going to do something a little bit different. We're switching over to WCW. I grew up a WCW kid. I mentioned that last episode. I watched WCW most of the time. Now, we did watch WWF, but it was, the flip back channel. When it was on commercial, we go to WWF, but we go back to Monday Night Nitro. Then, of course, when WCW went out of business, a little part of me died. I put this show on a poll on Twitter with some other shows, and this one won. This is a very important show in history. Of course, I'm talking about WCW Bash at the Beach 1996. This is the show that changed it all. This show is, if not the most influential pay-per-view in wrestling history, it's certainly up there near the top, and I'm certainly excited to talk about it tonight with you all. Former WCW and current AEW ringside announcer Tony Schiavone said on his podcast, What Happened When, with Conrad Thompson, that this is the most important pay-per-view in WCW history, and you have to agree. So some backstory here. Scott Hall, of course, famously invaded Monday Night Nitro on May 27th. This started the main storyline of this pay-per-view. He showed up at Nitro, jumped the guardrail during a match, and he painted the picture of a WWF invasion. A couple weeks later, Kevin Nash showed up, and the two of them declared war on WCW. They challenged any three WCW wrestlers to a match, which alluded to there being a third member of their group. Now, it's also important to point out that, it's no secret that WCW won the ratings war over WWF for 83 straight weeks, and that started right in the middle of this. I think it was June 17th, 1996. That was the first week that Nitro, well, it's not the first week that they won the ratings war, but that's when they won and didn't look back for 83 straight weeks, which is incredibly impressive. Now, like I said, they had alluded to there's a third member of their group. Well, there was a lot of speculation during this time. Who could it be? Who's the third man? Well, in the July 1st, 1996 edition of the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer reported that Crush and Mabel were discussed as early possibilities to be the third. They were both free agents and obviously had WWF connections, seeing as that's where they made their names. Davey Boy Smith was also a candidate. He had recently given notice to WWF officials that he was quitting, but it came out he never actually planned to leave the promotion. He was just leveraging a new contract. Understandable, and it worked. Now, the biggest name that was considered and rumored as the third man was Bret the Hitman Hart. His WWF contract had recently expired, and Eric Bischoff and WCW, they wanted him bad. They made him offer after offer, and he just ended up signing a extension with the WWF. But rumors were certainly flying. And then on the June 17th Monday Night Nitro, Mean Gene announced that WCW was going to have a random drawing, and whichever three names were drawn, that's who's going to represent WCW at the Bash of the Beach for their matchup in this hostile takeover match against the Outsiders and their third man. Sting, Lex Luger, and the Macho Man Randy Savage were the lucky three. So let's get into it. The show itself. We're in Daytona, Florida. We're at the Ocean Center. It's July 7th, 1996. We've got 8,300 fans on hand to witness history. That 8,300 fans is an important number because they've turned away about 2,000 fans at the door because they didn't have tickets for them. I've heard Eric Bischoff talk about this, and there was no way for them to know what the gate would be like. They had not been able to sell 8,300 seats at a lot of their shows, and even just a couple months before this, they struggled to get 2,000 paying customers in the door, and now they're turning away 2,000 people because they had given away some tickets to local radio stations, TV stations, stuff like that. in order to make sure there's butts and seats and try to build some buzz for it. We did have some dark matches, or some matches that were in front of the crowd before the pay-per-view itself started. I'm going to run through these really quickly. Jim Powers beat Hugh Morris, and that was just a dark match. But then we had some matches that were taped for WCW main event. You had the Steiners beating Harlem Heat by disqualification, and that was a title match. Now, this is hilarious. Go to the Peacock Network and watch the Monday Night Nitro from before this pay-per-view, and they're going to show you a highlight of when Harlem Heat won these belts. I think it was actually a couple weeks beforehand. I don't know the exact date on that, but I did see it when I was watching that Go Home Nitro, that the finish of that was so screwed. I mean, the Harlem Heat rolled up the Steiners, and the feet were in the ropes, and the referee's like, nope, don't care. We got to do a title change. This is the end of the match. So that was kind of funny to watch. Also taped for main event, you had Bobby Walker beating Billy Kidman, the Rock and Roll Express beating Fire and Ice, and Eddie Guerrero beating Lord Steven Regal. So, the fans got a lot of action there before the show actually went live. I think the longest match of those handful of matches was like 4 minutes. I don't agree with that. I think the fans would have rather seen Eddie Guerrero and Lord Steven Regal go about 8 minutes and cut some of these other matches, because those are two incredible workers. But it is what it is. So then we get to the actual pay-per-view, and Tony Schiavone welcomes us in. He's with Bobby Heenan and Dusty Rhodes on commentary. They mentioned several times throughout the show that Eric Bischoff is missing, and they don't know if he's been kidnapped or what. But, this is a very important part of the storyline. At the last pay-per-view at Great American Bash, Kevin Nash jackknife powerbombed Eric Bischoff off the stage through a table. And, they're very worried about where Eric Bischoff is. So Kevin Sullivan, Eric Bischoff, and Dusty Rhodes, they were kind of the creative team behind WCW at this time. And if there's one thing that they loved, it was putting cruiserweights on first. And Bischoff actually said on his 83 Weeks podcast that he attributes the success of WCW and the fact that so many people were tuning in to WCW at this time to these matches, to these luchador matches, because that's something that people in the States hadn't really seen before. So it was putting new eyeballs on the company, and that really was able to get all those eyeballs locked into this NWO storyline, which we don't know it's NWO at this point, but you get what I'm saying, this invasion angle with the Outsiders. And so this first match is Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Psychosis. And Mike Tenay, he joins the commentary team, just like he did the month before at the Great American Bash, which was actually Rey Mysterio Jr.'s debut with WCW. And I believe this is actually only Rey Mysterio Jr.'s fourth televised match for WCW. He debuted at Great American Bash in June, and in his debut match, it was a WCW Cruiserweight title match against Dean Malenko. He lost that one, but they liked that match so much that Sullivan and Bischoff decided to run it back the very next night on Nitro, and Malenko won again. Then he had a match against Billy Kidman on WCW Saturday Night at the end of June, and so I think that this is the fourth, from my research, what I could tell, this is just his fourth televised match with WCW. It's just crazy to see such an icon at this stage of his career looking back. And then as far as the commentary goes, as much as I love all four of these guys, I didn't like them together here. Dusty Rhodes, God bless him, he was never my favorite on commentary, to be honest with you. He got tongue-tied too often and kind of had brain farts and would just come off as incoherent at times and say things that didn't really make sense. And then Mike Tenay at this point was just so underutilized to me. He's explaining this match and the rivalry between these two like we're 5 years old, which I kind of appreciate. Because like I said, people in the States weren't used to seeing this kind of high-flying action. These are brand new moves that no one had seen, no one knew the names of. So I appreciate that. But it's just, there's too much going on. 4 men is just too many men talking during a match. Bobby Heenan was great. He brought a great comedic touch throughout this match. Tony Schiavone is always great. He's always been one of my favorite announcers. But like I said, 4-man booth, that's just too crowded. But this match is an absolute banger. Some incredibly innovative moves, especially for 1996. But some of the moves in this match You watch it in 2023 and you're like, man, that's impressive. I don't know when the last time or if I've ever seen that before. Some of the more memorable spots in this match were Psychosis hitting a leg drop off the top rope, and it was just an absolutely beautiful guillotine leg drop. He floated, and he went sky high. Just great move there. Ray ran off the ring apron and hit a Hurricane Rana on Psychosis on the floor. Ray hit an early version of the West Coast Pop also that Psychosis was able to kick out of. Then Ray set Psychosis up in the corner like he was going for a Shattered Dreams. I thought that was funny, but he didn't kick him in the jewels. He instead just did a drop kick to the chest. But then Ray, he did an early, his early version of the 619 was not a spin around the ropes to kick him in the face. It was more of a fake out move. He would run and swing his legs through the ropes as a fake out. He didn't actually use that move as a move to kick opponents in the face until many years later. And Ray actually credits Tiger Mask from Japan as the originator, but Mysterio definitely is the one who made that move famous. He also jumped off the top rope and hit a Hurricane Rana on Psychosis, who was on the ring apron, and did a Hurricane Rana to the floor. Just incredibly innovative and jaw-dropping stuff here. The finish came when Psychosis tried to hit a crucifix bomb, a.k.a. a Razor's Edge, or Outsider's Edge, or Splash Mountain as they call it, whatever your name that you want to call the move. But Psychosis was going for that in the corner off the top rope, but Ray reversed it into a Hurricane Rana off the top rope to get the pin after about 15 minutes and 18 seconds. Absolute banger. One of the better matches you'll ever see, let alone a opening match to a pay-per-view. Dave Meltzer loved it as well. He gave it a 4 3/4 stars. I got to agree. That actually might be low. 5-star match for me. Just incredible. It's also funny watching WCW during this era or during the 90s. You got to love how much they stick by their guys. The Hurricane Ranas were called Frankensteiners, and pretty much exclusively Frankensteiners because, by God, Scott Steiner invented it, and you're gonna credit him. But after this match, we get a backstage interview with Mean Gene. He's talking to Conan. He's the U.S. champ here, and he's got a title defense against Ric Flair later. It was a very solid 90s promo. Just straight to the point. He didn't mince his words. Good stuff there from Conan. But this next match, yeah. So we got Big Bubba Rogers, formerly known as the Big Boss Man, versus John Tenta, formerly known as Earthquake or the Shark, however you remember him. But so the rivalry between these two started when Tenta, who was wrestling as the Shark at the time, which, by the way, is an awful gimmick, he was kicked out of Jimmy Hart's Dungeon of Doom stable. Big Bubba replaced him, and these two feuded a lot over the following couple of months. Tenta had half his head shaved by Big Bubba when they kicked him out, and Tenta kept half his head shaved as a reminder, as motivation. These two wrestled 3 times in June, twice on Nitro and once at the Great American Bash. And then on the June 17th episode of Nitro, Big Bubba attacked Tenta with a sock filled with quarters. And here we are, the Carson City Silver Dollar match. What a terrible gimmick for a match. There's a ridiculously tall pole that's been attached to one of the ring posts. And it's been there all night, by the way. It was there during the Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis match, but this pole is crazy high. And they put a sock that was filled with silver dollars at the top of it. The premise is that the first guy who can retrieve the sock can use it as a weapon. But these guys are huge. Look at them. There's no shot, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but there's no shot that they can get their big fat asses up that pole. Now, it's also mentioned that they could take the pole down to get the sock, but they've got this thing ratchet strapped to the ring post with 3 industrial-sized ratchet straps, so good luck getting that down. And not to mention, it was just an awful match. The crowd did not care one bit about the storyline or the match itself. Big Bubba's manager, of course, Jimmy Hart, he ended up being the one who climbed the pole and got the sock, which shout out to him for being able to climb that pole. I think he was in his mid-50s at the time, and he was able to scale the pole and get the sock. But when he got down, of course, John Tenta was waiting behind him, and he got the sock from him, and nailed Big Bubba right in the face with it and got the pin right at 9 minutes long. Bad match, too long. Meltzer did give it a 1.25 stars, but I wouldn't have. It's a 0-star match for me. It was just awful. But right after that, we get another backstage interview. It's Mean Gene, and he's talking with Team WCW. We got Macho Man, we got Lex Luger, we got Sting, and they all deliver very classic and familiar promos hyping the match. It's exactly what you expect from these three. But honestly, it's kind of out of place because they all leave the interview jacked like they're ready to go to war right then. But we've got several matches before we get to their match. And instead of going straight to the main event, we've got another gimmick match. This time it's Diamond Dallas Page versus Hacksaw Jim Duggan. This is a tape fist match. So the backstory here, DDP had won Battle Bowl at Slamboree back in May. And for winning Battle Bowl, he got the Lord of the Ring ring. Now similar to the show's name here, not Lore of the Ring. He got the Lord of the Ring ring. And that was his trophy for winning the match, and he's going to defend it. I've always hated that concept, though. If you want a guy to win and then defend what he's won, give him a belt. A ring just seems silly to me. Like, not every guy's fingers are the same size, and it's a trophy, but it's not a trophy, it's a ring. But, they don't need another belt at this point. Definitely not. There's a lot of belts in WCW, and it devalues them by adding another, so you don't want to do that. I don't know. Maybe just make it a trophy. But anyway, Schiavone, he explains the rules here, and honestly, it seems just like a normal match, but they have their tapes fist. All right? And then even Tony Schiavone has said that he was confused by this because there were no special tape fist rules. It's just a match, but they have their tape. Okay. We see in this match, DDP tapes Duggan's feet together around the ring post. It was kind of a weird spot, but it was the second time in 2 matches that a guy was restrained by tape, and they both used scissors. Okay. What? You did this back to back. So in the last match, Big Bubba taped Tinta to the middle rope, and he used scissors to cut himself free. And in this one, he's taped to the ring post there, and he breaks out some scissors. That's just terrible booking. You can't have those spots that are so similar in back-to-back matches. It devalues them. The crowd gets desensitized. It's already a stupid thing to do, and now you're going to show it in back-to-back matches? One thing I will say, though, Hacksaw Jim Duggan is extremely over, which shocked me. I remember him being over when I was a kid, but not like this. We get some loud USA, USA chants going on. We get loud serenades of ho. I mean, it was impressive. A weird thing about this match being a tape fist match, though, is he wrestled most of it with no tape on his fist. Because that's what DDP uses scissors for. He cut his tape off. It makes no sense. It makes the match stipulation absolutely stupid. Now, there was a very abrupt finish to this match. Duggan was climbing into the ring, and DDP kicked the middle rope, which nailed Duggan and the boys. So as soon as he's bent over in pain, clutching his jewels, DDP hits a diamond cutter out of nowhere, and he gets the win. Now, immediately after the 3 count, though, Duggan got up, no selling the finisher, and then he wrapped his fist in tape and punched DDP and knocked him out. All right. It was around 5.5 minutes. Not an awful match, surprisingly, but not good either. It got a 1.25 stars from Meltzer, and honestly, I'd say that's about right. So one thing WCW also liked to do was these backstage interviews with Mean Gene, and it's understandable. Mean Gene's the best to ever do it, so I get it. But this time he's backstage with Kevin Sullivan and the Giant. They've got a match against Arn Anderson and Chris Benoit later. It's kind of weird that the company's champion is in a tag team match, but it's forgivable. The Giant's the champion at the time, and you don't really need a title defense on this show because of the outsider stuff and what's going on there. That's your hot storyline, so a title match might dilute that. I get it. And the stipulation in their match is that if the Horsemen win the tag team match, then a member of the Horsemen gets a title shot the following night against the Giant. So it works. I like it. So then after this interview, which has some good stuff from Mean Gene and Jimmy Hart, as he's wrapping it up, Jimmy Hart is really close to Mean Gene, and Mean Gene goes, "Hey, could you do me a favor? Could you brush your teeth?" That's just classic stuff there. But after this, we go to another interview. This one's out on the entrance ramp out at ringside, and it's Lee Marshall. He's interviewing the Horsemen, Benoit and Arn Anderson. Honestly, it's a weird place to do an interview because while they're standing there right at the entrance, Marshall, when they wrap up, which is a very solid promo from Arn Anderson, by the way, but as he's wrapping this up, he throws to the next match, and then Public Enemy's music starts playing, and the Horsemen and Lee Marshall have to get out of the way and mosey backstage. It's kind of weird, but something that is interesting. If you don't know who Lee Marshall is, for years he was the voice of Tony the Tiger. So there's that. That's right, serial Tony the Tiger. But this next match, it's a double dog collar match between the Public Enemy and the Nasty Boys. Got a problem with this too. Not the match, but 3 gimmick matches in a row. That's just not how I would have done it. And Eric Bischoff, he doesn't like gimmick matches at all. And he said in interviews that part of the reason why he hates gimmick matches so much is because they did so many of them that he just got tired of it and burned out. And yeah, I get it. You do 3 in a row, it's like, man, when you go back to a classic wrestling match, it's kind of shocking to the system. But this match was really just a hardcore train wreck, but that is what was to be expected. But there was a pin attempt on top of a surfboard on the entrance ramp, and that made me realize this match is ridiculous because there's only one ref. And these 2 teams are, 2 guys are dog collared together and the other 2 are collared together with the chain, but they're not staying together. And you got one ref and he's supposed to be accountable for counting the pinfall. He can't keep his eye on all 4 guys. They're all over the place. But that's just me overthinking it. It's fine. This match was put out there for one reason and one reason only, and that was to quench the thirst for violence and weapon spots. We get trash cans, a surfboard, a life preserver, an inflatable shark, tables, among other things. There's also a spot with the world's strongest table. Rocco Rock gets pulled off the top rope onto a table in the middle of the ring, and it did not break. So then Jerry Saggs puts him back on top of the table, jumps off the rope, and delivers an elbow drop, and the table still didn't break. Sheesh. That's got to be hell on the back and the ribs to take shots on that table and it just be stiff. That's not a working table. That's a shoot table. But the finish comes when the Nasty Boys double clothesline Rocco Rock with the chain and get the pin. Now, as soon as the bell rang, it didn't matter. These 4 kept fighting after the bell, and there were some stiff shots there with the chain to the back, chain to the side of the head. It was a mess of a match, but the brutality after the match was crazy. Meltzer gave it a 1.25 stars, but I'll say this. It was an entertaining 11 minutes and some change, if nothing else. So back to Mean Gene, right? That's the formula. Match Mean Gene. So he's backstage again. This time he's outside the Outsiders locker room, which is surrounded by security. And he's once again talking about Bischoff and how he was brutally attacked last month at the pay-per-view, how he's missing, and they're really building the main event in this whole angle. So I think they did a great job at that. Next up, we got the WCW Cruiserweight title match. It's the Disco Inferno versus the champion, Dean Malenko. And man, I hated the Disco Inferno growing up. And to be honest with you, I'm not really a fan of him today either. If you follow him on social media or if you've heard interviews with him, shoot interviews, he talks like he's the all-knowing authority on the business. But that's another story for another time. We're talking about here he is in 1996 against Malenko. Who is Dean Malenko, that being? One of the best technical wrestlers of all time. So it's such a treat to get to go back and watch some of his matches. And this was a good one too. The crowd was a little flat, but the match was solid. We saw a more serious and focused Disco Inferno than we've been used to seeing around this time frame. He wasn't doing as much dancing and showboating. He was really attacking Dean Malenko and trying to get the win. But the finish here comes when Malenko hits a butterfly powerbomb and then a beautiful transition into the Texas Cloverleaf for the submission. It was right at 12 minutes. Meltzer gave it 3.25 stars. That's a solid match. It was a very good one. So we follow up a very solid match with an absolutely awful match. We've got Steve Mongo McMichael versus Joe Gomez. And to quote Vern Lundquist from Happy Gilmore, who the hell is Joe Gomez? I don't know. Still, I don't remember Joe Gomez. And seeing him when I rewatched this pay-per-view didn't ring any bells. So, okay. Mongo did have the look and the want to, which I can appreciate. But man, he was terrible in the ring. He might be the worst wrestler of all time to get a serious push. Because Mongo did get that push. Awful. And, my heart goes out to him. I know he's going through some health problems right now, but watching him back after all these years is it's brutal. Just botch after botch. No chemistry with whichever dance partner you put in the ring with him. There was no rhythm. It's just bad. And if you think that's just me being harsh, watch this match and hear the deafening silence from the crowd. Now, this match does also have an embarrassing attempt of a sunset flip. That spot was just botched horribly, but thankfully it was immediately followed by the finish. Mongo hit a tombstone, which there is no shot I would have ever trusted Mongo McMichael enough to give me a tombstone. Nope, I wouldn't take it. That doesn't work for me, brother. But he gets the pinfall after about 6 minutes, 44 seconds, and that's about 6 minutes too long. I think that Mongo should have just squashed him so we could get on to the next one because this match is awful. -0.5 star from Dave Meltzer. That's too generous. Think about this. On the pay-per-view, we got Mongo McMichael versus Joe Gomez. On the pre-show, or taped before the show for WCW main event, we got Eddie Guerrero and Lord Steven Regal. Two of the best to ever do it were not on the show, but two of the worst to ever do it were on the show. Make that make sense. After the match, we go backstage again with Mean Gene. He's got Flair with him now. He's got Woman with him now. He's got Miss Elizabeth with him now. Vintage Flair promo. And yes, he's on 10. And also, Mean Gene, detrimentally horny. Woman's flirting with him, and he is just hilarious to watch. Now, storyline around this time is that Miss Elizabeth was brought back to WCW with Macho Man, but they got a divorce, and she got a bunch of money from the settlement, which this happened way earlier in the year in 1996, storyline-wise, but she's been spending all Macho Man's money, and so she's hinting at having a big party across the street after the show using some of that money, and wants Mean Gene to come, and Woman's flirting with Mean Gene, and it's hilarious. And as he's throwing back to ringside, Mean Gene says, in addition to wrestling, we're going to have a little pole vaulting competition here. That was hilarious. That popped me. Just great stuff. But we're to the ring now, and it is Ric Flair. It is Conan. It's for the U.S. title. And it was awesome seeing Conan come into the ring because he was wearing this entrance jacket that had the AAA or AAA wrestling promotion logo on it, and I thought that was awesome. It's weird seeing him in the kind of ring gear he was in, though, because when I think of Conan, I think about childhood. I'm thinking, I see sagging pants, a tank top, flannel shirt, a fedora, some dark sunglasses. But here he's just in a wrestling singlet that's got some tassels on it. But that's weird to me. But also, like I said, it's just cool letting him rock the a different promotion on his gear as he's coming to the ring. That cross promotion is always going to get a pop out of me. Now in the match, Woman is very involved, and I mean very involved. Conan is on the top rope, and she's shaking the bottom rope and makes him fall. Then Flair had Nick Patrick distracted, and she got in the ring and kicked him right in the balls. It's just classic Ric Flair heel stuff here. Just the dirtiest player in the game, right? He earned that nickname. This match also reminded me of the patented Nick Patrick move. If you didn't know this before, you'll never not notice it going forward. Nick Patrick, great referee, one of the best, but he had this thing where if he was counting, he would always put his right hand under the guy whose shoulders are to the mat, and he would count with his left hand, And if it wasn't supposed to be the finish, he would lift the shoulder himself. He would let the guy know, hey, kick out. So I noticed it years and years and years ago, and this reminded me of it. But the finish of this one was messy, though. So Elizabeth gets on the apron, and she gets Nick Patrick's attention. And then Woman is up on the apron on the other side of the ring, and she takes her stiletto off. But she has to wait 3 business days for the guys to mosey on over to her. Like, this spot was supposed to be smoother than this, you could tell. It was just a timing issue between the two. And if you've heard in interviews, Ric Flair is always on time. So I'm guessing it's just Conan. He was still kind of green in this match, but they also hadn't worked together. So it's just a timing issue. But they eventually get over to her. She hits Conan in the side of the head with the heel, which didn't look good. She didn't lay her shit in. She should have actually hit him if she's going to do it as lightly as she did. But she knocked him out with the heel. Flair pins him. He gets the win. He's the U.S. champ. First time since, I think, 1981 that he was a U.S. champ, so a long time between reigns there. Of course, after that one, he moved into the world title picture where he won it 13 times from there to then. And this match went 15 minutes, 39 seconds. Not a bad match at all, but the finish stunk. It was just clunky. Meltzer gave it 2.5 stars. So we go back to Mean Gene again. He's outside the Outsiders dressing room again. And he says there's a third man in there now, but he doesn't know who it is. And although the voice is familiar, it's muffled, and he can't tell. So next up we got Arn Anderson and Chris Benoit versus the Giant and Kevin Sullivan. So I want you to think about this. 3 straight matches. The 4 horsemen are in all of them. So, okay, I get it. You know, get your horsemen men out there. Horsemen versus Dungeon of Doom. The Horsemen are out first, but they're attacked from behind. Now, as they fight, Mongo comes out, and he nails the Giant with the briefcase. And the Giant chases after him and leaves Sullivan alone for a little bit until Jimmy Hart brings him back almost immediately. Honestly, it was a dumb spot because he was back at ringside so quickly that there was no point to it, and it didn't build enough drama. Kevin Sullivan didn't get beat up enough without a partner for it to really matter. The match was fine, though. The Horsemen isolated Sullivan and worked him over for a majority of the match. There was a terrible botch, though. Sullivan went for a catapult on Arn Anderson where he was supposed to go into Benoit, who was up on the top rope. But he didn't get him up, and so Arn had to basically force himself standing up, and he jumped into Benoit, and it just did not look good. It was bad. But then Sullivan tagged in the Giant, and you talk about a hot tag. That was the turning point. Benoit and Sullivan fought back up the entrance ramp to the beach set, and while they were up there, the Giant chokeslammed Arn Anderson, got the win. Benoit and Sullivan kept fighting after the match, which was okay because these two definitely had a rivalry. But it was weird because Woman came down to the ring and was pleading with Chris Benoit to stop. You're going to hurt him, she said. And finally, the Giant came back out and he chased Benoit away, but it was so weird because Woman was Flair's manager, a.k.a. an affiliate of the Four Horsemen, but she was pleading with Chris Benoit to stop attacking Kevin Sullivan. Now, also, of course, she was romantically involved with both of them. She was married to Kevin Sullivan and had an affair with Chris Benoit, and that had come out in real life right before this, no kayfabe. So they're really building into their work shoot that these two would have, that angle, and blurring the lines of reality. But it was weird how they did it here. Because not everyone knew the real life drama between Sullivan and Benoit. It was just kind of one of those, if you know, you know, and here's a treat for you. But it's not a treat, man. I've never really been a fan of using, real life love drama in storylines like the Matt Hardy and Edge storyline with Lita. That's messy and that's dangerous to me. But Meltzer gave this match 2 stars and it went right at 8 minutes. Definitely nothing special, which is unfortunate considering who all was involved. But, one thing that stood out was even though this is 2 heel tag teams, the Giant was over in 1996. The fans were behind him 100%. But now, it's main event time. It's the Hostile Takeover match. It's Sting. It's Lex Luger. It's the Macho Man Randy Savage. They're taking on the Outsiders and their mystery third man. Who could it be? We get a video package here showing us how we got here. The Outsiders appearing on Nitro, the attack on Bischoff at Great American Bash, the standoffs with Team WCW. It was very well done video package, and it was very 90s. Speaking of very 90s, Michael Buffer comes out next. He's in the ring, and if that ain't nostalgic, then we lived very different childhoods. Let's get ready to rumble. Perfect. The Outsiders make their entrance here, and honestly, it's weird hearing them come out to the ring without the patented NWO entrance theme. I believe it's called Rock House. So that was weird, but you know, they hadn't really found their groove yet. You can forgive it. Then Sting's music plays, but immediately stops. That was weird. That was a botch. But Mean Gene comes out, and he gets in the ring, and he asks the Outsiders about the third man. Where's your third man? But all Hall and Nash have to say is that the third man is in the building, but they can handle it for now. You got to love it. They're oozing machismo. Then Sting's music hits again, and Team WCW is out with an insane amount of pyro. They spent the budget on the pyro right here. And the crowd is an electric factory for this one from start to finish. I mean, this just has that big-time fight feel. The storyline was so money. Luger gets knocked out early, and he's done. We don't see him anymore. Sting's going for a Stinger splash on Nash, and Luger, they're both out on that ring apron, but as he splashed on top of Nash, Nash went into Luger, and he hit his head on the metal spring that's between the ring post and the turnbuckle. And they did a stretcher job. They carried Luger up the ramp, and he's gone. So now we got a 2-on-2 matchup. It's a nightmare for Team WCW. There was a nasty-looking botch in this one as well. Kevin Nash went for an elbow drop on Randy Savage, and Savage was supposed to roll out of the way, but he didn't do it quickly enough, and so Kevin Nash came down right on his head. But thankfully, he was okay. It looked brutal, though. Like, it was one of those real life, is the ref going to throw up the X, because he might be done. But he wasn't. He was okay. The Outsiders had the advantage for most of the match. Every time Sting or Savage start to build momentum, the Outsiders regain it quickly. Macho Man does get a hot tag, though, and starts cleaning house until Nash hits a low blow on him behind referee Pee Wee Randy Anderson's back. And then the tide changed forever. Hulk Hogan comes out. He's wearing his traditional red and yellow getup. Now, Hogan hadn't been on TV for WCW since April. They gave him some time off. He went to shoot a movie. Then he wanted to spend time with his family. And but now he's back. In commentary, they hyped him up and says, "Go get him, Hulk." And I do love how Bobby Heenan, now, he's gotten some flack over this throughout the years. Bobby Heenan questions, whose side is he on? But honestly, that's just great long-term storytelling, because Heenan and Hogan never saw eye to eye. They were never on the same page. And so it's absolutely perfect that Heenan would question Hulk Hogan. That was going on since the 80s in WWF. But then when he gets in the ring, the Outsiders clear out. And he rips off his shirt like we're used to seeing. And so we think, okay, WCW's, they're in great hands here. But then he does the unthinkable. He drops the leg on Randy Savage. The crowd's shocked. He's the third man. Hall and Nash get back in the ring. They high five. He tosses Randy Anderson out to the floor, drops another leg on him. And, he pins him, and Hall counts to 3. But there is no winner in this one. It's deemed a no contest. Match didn't actually have a finish, but just a surreal scene in the ring. The crowd starts filling up with trash. Mean Gene gets in the ring to interview them, and Hogan cut probably the best promo of his career right here. He tells the fans to shut up, which is, the polar opposite of his character his whole career up until now. He calls him, Hall and Nash, the New World Order of Wrestling, and thus the NWO is born. It's funny that he calls it the NWO, or the New World Order, the first time, because twice afterwards he calls it the New World Organization, but that's okay. It's a new thing. It's a new catchphrase for Hulk Hogan. And then, Tony Schiavone closes the show with a very somber tone, and he delivers a line that I will never, ever forget. He's thanking the fans for tuning in, and he's very sad and dejected sounding, but he says, Hulk Hogan, you can go to hell. Straight to hell. Just some iconic stuff there from Tony Schiavone. Now, some backstory behind this. So when Eric Bischoff originally pitched it to Hogan for him to be the third man, Hogan said no. He thought it would be too damaging to his reputation and his bottom line. He didn't want to hurt his pockets. Heels don't sell merchandise. No one's going to buy a Heels merchandise. It's the red and yellow. It's the Hulkamania. It's the say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and all that. You can't throw all that away. But Bischoff flew to L.A. in late June to talk to Hogan again because his contract was coming up later in 1996, and Hogan asked him who's going to be the third man. And Eric said he wasn't really sure, but Hogan said, you're looking at him. So he realized the money train was leaving the station, and he had to jump on board. But Hulk Hogan was notorious for getting cold feet and changing plans last second. I think everybody who's ever been familiar with the behind-the-scenes workings of Hulk Hogan, he had a phrase, that doesn't work for me, brother. And he will change the finish if he doesn't like it. But Kevin Sullivan knew that, and he had Hulk Hogan stay with him at his house the night before this pay-per-view. And he wanted to try to keep him isolated and focused on the plan. And it almost didn't work. Hogan's manager was with him, and Sullivan, kept them separate rooms. Like, don't even sleep in the same room. But Hogan was expressing doubt and concerns even the night before, saying it would be a career killer. Now, this I found very interesting. If he ended up backing out the last second, Eric Bischoff did have one more backup plan. Sting. Sting was going to turn on Team WCW during the match, and he was going to be the third man. Now, he was also reluctant to turn heel because Sting was always a babyface, like the ultimate babyface. Neon paint and, high-fiving fans on the way to the ring. But he was also the ultimate company man, and he agreed. He would do it if that's what it needed. And when the pay-per-view started, Hogan wasn't even in the arena yet. And he hadn't given his final confirmation that he's on board with the plan. But he finally arrived about a half hour before the main event, and he agreed. So we're on board with our plan here. Tony Schiavone actually said that he didn't know who was going to be the third man until it happened. They kept him in the dark. And he thought that when Mongo attacked the Giant and the Giant was taken out and he ran up, chased Mongo off, he thought it was going to be the Giant. He thought, okay, that makes sense. The Giant's going to be away for the rest of this match. The Horseman will beat Kevin Sullivan, and we won't see the Giant anymore, but then we'll see the Giant during the main event. He'll run out and be the third man. That would have made a lot of sense, and I probably would have thought the same thing had I been in Tony's shoes, but that's obviously not what they went with, and I think it worked out just the way they did. The match got 3 stars from Meltzer. It went about 16 minutes long, but the 3 stars doesn't matter. The time doesn't matter. You can't understate how important this match, this moment, this pay-per-view was for the history of the business. Now, I mentioned earlier about, the 3 gimmick matches in a row and how I hated that, and how I hated also going from a banger of a match to an absolute dud of a match from the first match to the second match. I did this on the last episode, and I'm not going to do it every show, but the ones where I feel like they should have booked it differently, I'm going to tell you how I would have booked these matches, the order in which I would put these matches on. I think you keep Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Psychosis in the one spot because, like I said, all-time classic match, and it's going to fire the crowd up and get them into it for the long haul. Then I would go with Jim Duggan and DDP because it's not an absolutely terrible match, but it's not a good match either. Not a great match, at least. So put it on next. Cool them down a little bit. Then I would go with Mongo versus Joe Gomez if you have to have it on the show at all. Personally, I would have switched this one out, had Eddie Guerrero versus Lord Steven Regal. But if you have to have this one, get it out there now. Get it over with. Let's forget about it. Move on. Then I would go with John Tenta versus Big Bubba Rogers here. But then I heat the crowd back up. Dean Malenko versus Disco Inferno, followed by the Nasty Boys versus Public Enemy. Then I go Flair and Conan. Then I go the Horsemen versus Dungeon of Doom. Then, of course, our main event, Outsiders versus Team WCW. The reason I do that is in between each of those gimmick matches, we have a non-gimmick match. It makes the gimmick matches stand out more, makes them more important, more reasonable, really. Put a buffer in between them. But I wasn't there. I was 8 years old watching this on TV in East Tennessee. So now I'll go with my Rob Van Dam 5-star moment of the show. And I mean, come on. Could it really be anything else? It's the heel turn that shook the wrestling world. Hulk Hogan's leg drop to Macho Man Randy Savage. Any other pay-per-view, if that Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis match had been on it, it's probably the 5-star moment of the show. But Hulk Hogan's heel turn is so important. The Shockmaster shockingly bad moment of the show. So John Tenta versus Big Bubba Rogers was certainly a candidate. But it's got to be Mongo versus Joe Gomez. What a terrible match. Just an absolute... It was the drizzling shits. Okay. So that's WCW Bash at the Beach 1996. Appreciate you all joining me this week. Next episode... Of course, I do these bi-weekly, so in 2 weeks when I release an episode, I'm going to switch it up. I typically will rely on Twitter polls to determine the pay-per-view that I'm covering for my episodes. But next one, I'm gonna take creative control here. I'm going to make an executive decision. Because this show was on the poll for episode 2 and episode 1, honestly. And it didn't win, but it was second place this time. And I recently rewatched it, and I feel like it needs to be covered. ECW One Night Stand 2005. That show is a lot of fun to me. That show means a lot to me because I am a big ECW fan. So that's what we're covering next episode. ECW One Night Stand 2005. It is on Peacock in the WWE section, so you can watch it and prepare. And yeah, so with that, WCW Bash at the Beach 1996. Down for the 3 count. I thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time on the Lore of the Ring.